you're getting good news that the NHL is at least crossing or allowing cross travel.
Yes, sir, there she goes.
Hello and welcome to episode 126 of Section 138. I'm your host, Mark Colley. As always, I'm joined by Bryson. How are you, Bryson?
I'm doing good, Mark. Not the greatest series this weekend, but glad you're back as well. Jacob, on the other hand, has got to start eating healthier because of the dentist. So
Yeah, he's unavailable this week. So just as I was last week, he's unavailable this week. We brought in David, a new voice to the podcast, friend of the pod, that can help fill in for Jacob this week. So how are you, Dave?
Hey, I'm good. How are you? Thanks for having me on, guys.
Yeah, for sure. And like you mentioned, Bryson, it's not the weekend the Blue Jays wanted to have. They lose 2 of 3 to the Astros, which it seems like the two teams that just have the Blue Jays number this year are the Tampa Bay Rays and the Houston Astros. Nothing has gone as planned when facing them, and there's a few other knocks that the Blue Jays took this weekend. Danny Jansen is now day-to-day, I would assume, probably going to go on the 10-day IL with a right hamstring strain. So not how we wanted things to go, but the one thing I think all of us want to talk about has nothing to do with the series that actually took place. It's the fact that we've seen these plans from the NHL now to have Canadian teams and American teams play each other and cross the border, and there's been federal approval for the plan, and it does have heavy health restrictions and public health restrictions, but it seems like a step forward and a step in the right direction for the Blue Jays to potentially end up playing in Toronto this season. Now, there's still a lot of hoops to jump through along those lines. The Blue Jays have announced today that they're going to keep selling tickets until July 21st. So we know they're going to stay home until at the very least then, and they've expanded capacity to 80% at Salem Field. So I know, Bryson, you've always been on the train of the Blue Jays playing in Toronto, but I mean, are you encouraged by these? And I know that your prediction of July 1st has kind of gone down the drain, but you got to be at least a little bit excited by this news, right?
Yeah, it's good and bad at the same time. You guys know, going back to, I guess, spring, I said July 1st is my prediction. And I guess that was kind of still possible until the news today that they're going to be staying in Buffalo through July 21st, as you mentioned. I guess the good news is that they're increasing capacity. So that's also going to be good, because the atmosphere so far in Buffalo has obviously been a completely different story from Dunedin. I think everyone can agree with that. So it's been a lot. It feels more like a home game, but of course it's still not the same. They're not in Toronto yet. But at the same time, with this news, I guess, kind of approving the NHL teams to cross the border in the next round based off of how the playoffs are kind of restructured this season, it gives me a little bit of encouragement. It does. I mean, I feel like by the minute or day by day, it's getting more possible and more likely that they will be back at some point. However, will it be in August? Will it be in September? Well, those are the only two, I guess, options now. But to me, I wonder what's more likely. Are they going to be back in August? Would they be back maybe early September-ish? Either way, I think for a possible playoff push, if they make it, it'll be encouraging to see them back home by then. And I think by then you kind of have to have some sort of answer. And I think by then they might be back as well, because also as you're entering September, October, you're getting closer to the start of the next season for the NHL as well. You have to remember that. I believe they're supposed to start, like, a tentative date for them is October 12th. And you have to imagine by then they're also going to be going back to their old format rather than a Canadian division, how they did it this year. So that gives me encouragement. I do think they will be back at some point. I know we had an over-under probably back in February, March, if it was going to be over under 10 games. I think you and Jacob chose under, I chose over. And I guess for now I still would choose. I mean, it's borderline, because I mean, I still don't know. I still, if they come back in August, I still think there's a chance they could be over 10 games. So I'll stick with the over. I might as well stick with it. But yeah, at the same time, as much as it's been disappointing, I do think that you're getting good news that the NHL is at least crossing or allowing cross travel. And because the other thing too is, I know for the NHL, it's kind of like it's a playoff series. So it'd be one team coming in rather than the Blue Jays coming in and then whoever they're playing on the regular season schedule. But however, once you open this door up, it's opening up the whole whack of scenarios. And that's why it's unfair if that's not the case for the Jays, but you have to look at it and think, if you're allowing this, then eventually it's going to come down to the fact that you're going to be allowing baseball teams to cross the border and the Jays to come home. And even in this case, Toronto FC, they're playing right now. They're stuck in Florida. The Raptors, we know they were in Florida this year too. So you're opening up that possibility. And maybe this is the first step towards it. I know, I guess cases are trending in the right direction, I guess, in Ontario and in Canada. Vaccines are starting to come in Canada. So the numbers are looking encouraging now, but you have to imagine we're getting closer to that point. So that's why at the same time, July 1st, my prediction's out the window. It would have been pretty cool for them to come back on Canada Day, but I'm still getting encouraged day by day that they will be back at some point. It's just a question if they're going to be back in August or if they're going to be back in September.
I think that the border is a big situation because like with the teams getting vaccinated, there's 85% vaccination rate for most MLB teams, and but some teams aren't. So I don't know like what the rules would be if vaccinated teams coming into the country, what their plans would be, what the Canadian government rules would be. But like I know the Jays, they're almost at 85% vaccination rate, and they might be allowed in, but there's many other teams that they have to play, and the visiting team has to play. So and to me, it just really depends on if they allow the visiting teams to come in, because the NHL, it's different because there's only one team coming in to play the Eastern Conference Finals, but with the Jays, there's many teams, so I don't know how they view that. But I'm encouraged by the NHL going forward with the playoffs, but I still think I'm kind of with Bryson. I don't know, like I'm kind of hopeful, but I don't know for sure if we're gonna have enough fans. If we're gonna allow the Jays in Toronto. But yeah, fans, I don't think we're allowing fans. I don't know about you guys, but I don't
That's
think we're
another
allowing
Yeah.
fans at all.
whole case.
Yeah, I don't really see fans happening, but yeah, like we've talked about it before, but like once all the teams are vaccinated and once the Blue Jays meet that 85% threshold, there's kind of no reason why they shouldn't be let into the country and shouldn't be able to cross the border to play. And the Blue Jays, we know, are going to meet that 85% threshold over the next week or two. We know, I think it's like 19 or 20 teams around baseball have met that threshold, but there's still a few teams here and there that haven't met that threshold. So that's definitely something that plays into the conversation. But I think one of the big things is the fact that you wouldn't have fans in Toronto and you do have fans in Buffalo. And I think the Blue Jays right now, at least, they aren't going to trade what they have in Buffalo with at least, 4 or 5,000 fans. I think they're at 80% capacity. It's going to be 7,000 or 8,000. They're not going to trade that solid revenue stream, one of the few, in-person revenue streams that they have right now, given that they can't have fans in Toronto. They, can't have people at the games elsewhere. So I don't think they're going to trade that in-person revenue stream just to go to Toronto and then at the same time have to be subject to all these different protocols, right? You have to travel on your private jets, get tested before you come. Every day when you're in the country, you have to go through a modified bubble situation, which I mean basically means they're going to be locked in the Rogers Center Hotel, as far as we understand it. So I don't think they're right now. I think the reason why the NHL teams have decided to do this and the NHL has given this go ahead, while the Blue Jays are still trying to stay in Buffalo and still extending their stay in Buffalo until July 21st, is just because of these continued obstacles for them that the NHL doesn't really care about, especially because, it's one team for the NHL that has to do this for a week. This would be the Blue Jays having to do this for the remainder of the season. So I think that's one of the biggest hurdles that the Blue Jays have to jump in terms of getting to the point of playing in Toronto.
Yeah, for me, step one is allowing people or allowing the teams to come back. But however, if they're not going to allow anybody at Rogers Center, to me, it doesn't make sense why they would even make the jump. So that's why I do think if they're going to come back, they're going to want fans. And I personally don't see a problem or see a reason why you can't hold 10,000 people in Rogers Center. I don't. I know it's a whole different, everyone's got a different opinion. And even with the border, I feel like right now, like I don't see the hazard for it. I think it comes down to more of the optics, the fact that the general public can't cross the border yet freely. I think that's probably what's holding them back now, because Dave was even mentioning the vaccination rate. We know the Jays are at 85%. We know other teams are creeping up there. Most teams are, at least over half the league is, but it comes down to the optics. It comes down to what's fair, what's not, why can they cross the board, that whole scenario. And I don't know if you guys got a glimpse of what it would look like for the NHL, but based on what I was seeing, unless I was wrong, but from what I was seeing, I believe the Canadian teams can go as is. It's the American teams that have to kind of live in a modified bubble where you're just obviously stuck at the hotel or not. So that definitely is encouraging too for the Blue Jays perspective. We know the whole kind of situation they had last year with Travis Shaw, who was on the team last year at one point, where he pretty much called out the government or like the plans if they were to play in Toronto, how he would not, or players wouldn't be all for that and all that. And then a couple of days later, they get denied a federal approval. So we know how the players feel about that, especially people on the Jays. If you're living in a Rogers Center hotel when you have apartments and condos or such, it's a different scenario for the home team. Obviously the road team, you're stuck at the hotel anyway, but in this case, you just wouldn't be allowed to roam around the city. But either way, I feel like, I'm encouraged by this. As I said earlier, there's still a lot to go. And I know that Mark Shapiro continues to say that he is in daily dialogue with the government, which I believe. And I really do think they're trying to get something done. But, for me, you have to come back August, September now, but you got to come back with at least 10,000 people at Rogers Center. So if that's not the case, if that's not an option, then I would probably understand their decision to maybe stay in Buffalo. But either way, it's encouraging to see how it all maps out for the NHL teams. As I mentioned, the Canadian teams, nothing really changes. So unless I'm wrong by that, but from what I read, I was pretty sure that's the way they're doing it. And then, for American teams or even Canadian teams, when you cross the border, I don't know what the restrictions are there. I don't really think you can put any restrictions if you're the Canadian government while you're on US soil. So either way, a lot of pretty much uncertainty still, but this definitely for me is a step in the right direction. I do think, and I remain optimistic that something will get done, but please, 10,000 people. There's no reason why you can't. I'm sorry. There's no reason why you can't distance in Rogers Center what can hold up to 60,000 people, really, if you wanted to in a full house. Even I know 50,000 as well easily, but there's no reason why you can't.
Yeah, when do you guys? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, just the point, like what Bryson said. I'm with him on the 10,000 fans in the seats because we haven't seen a baseball game here in almost 2 years, so it's been a while. And also with the visiting teams coming into Toronto, I don't think they're going to be happy like staying in the Rogers Center hotel, like because when they go to U.S. City, they roam the city freely and they do whatever they want. Like kind of, I'm sure they like go out for dinner and stuff. But in Toronto, they wouldn't be able to do that. They would just be able to stay at the Rogers Center hotel. So yeah. I think that's another factor that you have to take in.
Yeah, I don't know if the MLBPA would stand in the way of that happening, if they would have a problem with that, but I don't know. We'll see.
It's unique though, because like the hotel's connected. That's why it makes sense for a visiting team. You just take the elevator and you're there. That's why. And either way, even if you wanted to roam the city right now, we know how it works. Everything's closed here anyway. But I mean,
no more. Or I guess not anymore, but
it just expired. But I believe there's a reopening thing coming. So either way, right now, everything's closed anyway. There's not much to do. And why put yourself at risk? We've had this conversation before back at the time when we were still uncertain about the Jays last year. But yeah, either way, you have to imagine that something good is coming out of this, because NHL, you open the door for that. Down the line, the Raptors and the Jays are going to need an answer as well. And even the Leafs for a regular schedule next year. So it'll all be interesting how that pans out. And I guess how the cases transpire here too. Like I mentioned, we're on the right track by the looks of it, and vaccines are available now. So I guess there's no reason not to be optimistic. That's all I have to say. But it definitely, it's a sensitive topic for some people, because a lot of people, even with the NHL plan, I've seen based off social media, not a lot of people are even agreeing with that. So you're just dealing with the entire public backlash, and it's all about optics for me, because there's no reason why you can't safely cross right now with 20 out of 30 teams or whatever it was at 85% vaccinated. So that's where I look at it, and that's what I think it's probably the case right now. It's just in terms of the public optics of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the optics of it, and then the actual progression in the public health situation, I think, are the two other factors that we haven't really talked about. It's like if we know that vaccinations are being open for second dose in Ontario. We know that cases are going down a lot. And, even in America, we have, people at whatever it is, 55-60% of people who have gotten at least one dose, I think it is. And then the number, of course, with the second dose is going to creep over that in a month or two.
It's
So
encouraging.
it is encouraging, and it's definitely going to change the situation as it progresses. But when do you guys want to put the over under at for the Blue Jays returning to Toronto? Or I guess we can just make our predictions, because before the season, you're right, Bryson, Jacob, and I think we both put at 0 games played in Toronto. But now
That's right. You did. Yes.
I think it is looking like it's going to shape up a lot better than that. So if I have to make a prediction of when the Blue Jays are going to return to Toronto, I'm going to say August 30th. They come back to Toronto for a homestand against Baltimore, and then they have an off day and then another 3-game series against Oakland. I think that's kind of the window of time I'm looking at for the Blue Jays to return to Toronto. Where would you guys place your prediction of when the Jays will return?
I'm thinking along the lines of you. I think September 1st, just because like
Ooh.
they're playing
So
in,
yeah.
they're playing in sorry. Yeah,
No,
they're
I was
playing
like,
in
yeah,
Buffalo.
that's a yeah.
Yeah, they're playing in Buffalo until at least July 21st, and plans take a while to kind of formulate. So I think September 1st.
Okay, I'll be more optimistic. So you guys have by the looks of it, they're playing a 3-game series against Baltimore. So I guess that's what you're looking at, Mark. August 30th, when it starts, and it goes into September 1, an off day, and then a weekend series against Oakland. I will go August 20th. I'll say that the start of a 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7-game homestand between Detroit for 3 and then the White Sox for 4. I'll be optimistic, especially because right after that, they go to Michigan. They go back to Detroit. It's close. August 20th, the Blue Jays return. I am calling it. Unfortunately, I'm 0 for 1, as July 1 would have been cool. Like I mentioned, that's not the case. It's not fun. But August 20th, Detroit, I'll make the prediction. I'll be more optimistic. It only makes sense because I was the most optimistic one at the start with you and Jacob, Mark. So I will continue to be that person. But I am happy that you guys are now, or at least you, Mark, for sure, that because I know that for sure, is that you guys are finally on the train, that it's going to look possible at some point this year. And I'm sure Jacob would agree with you on that one as well.
Yeah. Well, the situation has changed a lot. And I'm hopeful we'll have to get Jacob's opinion next week. But let's talk actually about what happened in this series, because, of course, it was a rough series. The Blue Jays took the first one, and then Hyun-Jin Ryu had his uncharacteristically bad outing in Game 2. In Game 3, it didn't go as planned either. Let's talk about Danny Jansen, because he is, like we said, day-to-day probably going to go on the 10-day IL. What does the Blue Jays catching situation look like? We know they have Reese McGuire on the 26-man roster. They can call up Riley Adams, who's already been on the 26-man roster this season, although he hasn't appeared in a game. They have Gabriel Moreno down in Double-A. He's, I guess, a long shot, but technically a possibility, especially given how well he's been doing. He's still raking down with the New Hampshire Fisher Cats. So what does the catching situation look like from here? Can you just have Reese McGuire and Riley Adams and wait it out until Alejandro Kirk comes off the injured list? Do you have to go out and make a signing of a guy like, Caleb Joseph from last year, that type of guy, that kind of veteran who can come in, isn't going to give you the production that you necessarily want, but can bolster the catching situation? Do you call up someone like Juan Graterol, who I believe is still in AAA for the Blue Jays? What's the solution for them here? How do they bridge the gap until Alejandro Kirk gets back and until Danny Jansen gets back?
Do you guys know like when Alejandro Kirk is coming back? Because I haven't heard much about that.
Yeah, I don't think we've really gotten updates from his rehab, but it was supposed to be 6 weeks when he first went on the IL.
Yeah,
It
that's
got bumped
exactly
up
the
to the
greatest thing.
yeah, it got
Yeah.
bumped up to the 60-day IL. So I think it's like mid-July or early July is the date that we had last.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I was
On there.
looking at Riley Adams' stats yesterday, and he had a 957 OPS in Double-A, I believe. So, but you don't want to rush him, and Reese McGuire, just going through the catchers, Reese McGuire, he's not very good, and Danny Jansen,
Yeah.
if he has to go on the IL, he's a good defensive catcher. He was tops. I read a stat. He was tops in almost all defensive categories for American League catchers. So that'll definitely be a huge miss for the Jays. But and also Moreno, I don't want to rush him too much because he's only in Double A. So I feel like we have to hold that off a bit. And like you said, we can go get a guy like Caleb Joseph, but we'll just have to. I don't know who's out there right now, but maybe like Jonathan Lucroy. I don't know, some guy like that. But hopefully, hopefully it doesn't because we hopefully it doesn't affect us too much because we haven't gotten a lot of offense from our catchers this year, and Danny Jansen was only hitting 157, so it's not like he was bringing a lot on offense, but like I said, he was bringing a lot on defense. So I think it'll be a
Yeah.
huge miss. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, when you look at it now too, it's just the all of a sudden the catching depth has gotten a little weak by the looks of it. And right now, you are right. You have Reese McGuire, I guess, penciled in as your starting catcher. If Danny Jansen goes on the IL, it seems like it. Every day-to-day injury on the Jays turns into an IL stint. But as well, if you're diagnosing him with a hamstring strain even right after the game, that's not exactly the greatest thing. So, I mean, yeah, Dave, you went over Riley Adams' numbers in AAA so far. And he's had a really good year based off of what I've seen through 19 games. Like you said, an OPS well north of 900. And, he's getting on base. And we know too, going back to earlier in the year, how Riley Adams was up for a few days. And I guess at the time they thought Alejandro Kirk wouldn't miss too much time, which makes sense of why he was up because we know Reese McGuire is out of options. And then right after we kind of got more detail about the Kirk injury, Reese McGuire came up right away. So Reese McGuire is going to be up here for the immediate future and for a little bit now. It's just it looks like it, but Riley Adams has got to be the guy for me. At least you have to start, give him a chance. It doesn't mean you roll with him the entire way. And for me, it's based on when you look at as well in the AAA roster, it's either Riley Adams or it's Juan Gratterall. So Juan Gratterall, I believe, was traded for, or the Jays did sign him near the end of the spring. I do remember we mentioned that briefly when we recorded at the time, but those are the two options for me. And with Riley Adams, I think you have to go with him just because we know he's a prospect. He's one of the best catching prospects in the organization as we speak, and give him the chance to back up Reese McGuire. He's a righty, so that gives the flexibility because McGuire is obviously a lefty. But going back to Danny Jansen as well, it was a very fluky injury from my opinion, just because the play where he was obviously tagged out at third, it was more of a heads up play by Houston because he was advanced third, and all of a sudden they throw it over to third base and they tag him out. So obviously a play you don't see from every fielder or pretty much any team, but Houston's obviously a really good team. So that's pretty much what happened. He really wasn't doing anything wrong, Jansen. Maybe he could have been a little bit more aware of it, but the slide kind of seemed awkward, and right away they showed it, or they zoomed in on it after he obviously left the game, and he was pretty much grabbing his hamstring right away, and he looked in discomfort immediately. So he wasn't his year hitting, but defensively he brings a lot more to the table. And the one thing I'm going to be curious about now, and something that I haven't really noticed, is that Hyun-Jin Ryu has only pitched to what do you call it, Danny Jansen in his 2 years here, at least his 2 seasons here. So how's that going to work out? How will Hyun-Jin Ryu react? Because like I mentioned, Danny Jansen's been the guy, so he's going to have to either catch from Reese McGuire, Riley Adams, maybe Juan Gratterall. Those are 3 options now. And, it's sad because Jansen just hasn't been good this year whatsoever. And he's shown flashes, just not enough to kind of convince people otherwise. And now you're going to have to rely on Reese McGuire. And then, of course, Riley Adams or Juan Gratterall.
Having some mic trouble. Give me a minute.
Okay, no problem.
There we go. Okay.
All right, good.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to see how the pitching staff will shake out. I mean, obviously the obvious solution is just have Reese McGuire catch Hyun-Jin Ryu, but it's going to be interesting to see him with a different catcher because for all the injury talk that we do mention about the Blue Jays, right, it seems like everyone's getting injured. Credit goes to Danny Jansen for not really suffering an injury in his major league career before this point, and especially for a catcher who we know is in there day in and day out. Of course, he's always kind of had that other guy on the roster, whether it's Luke Maile, whether it's Reese McGuire, whether it is Caleb Joseph. He has always been, only playing 2 out of every 3 games. But credit goes to him for being able to get it to this point without having a significant injury. And who knows, maybe this isn't significant. Maybe he will avoid an IL stint. We all know how unlikely that is. It seems like every day-to-day injury is always going on the IL, but yeah, it should be interesting. I think Riley Adams is definitely the guy you go to. For me, it's not even really a question. He's already been on the major league roster. They obviously already think he's ready to play in the majors and make his major league debut and make an impact on the major league roster. So to me, it's a no-brainer that you go to Riley Adams, especially over someone like Juan Graterol. Like, Graterol is not part of this team going forward. He's not part of the long-term picture for the Blue Jays. He is kind of just that third option, that last resort that you have to go to in the case of massive injuries, like we're seeing with Alejandro Kirk, with potentially Danny Jansen. So I think it's Riley Adams 100%. There's no doubt in my mind that they go to him.
The other thing too is I don't even know if Juan Graterol is on the 40-man roster. So I mean, that's obviously an extra move you have to make if you want to go with Juan Graterol. But yeah, for me, it seems like Riley Adams is the guy to go to. And I guess depending on the severity of the Jansen injury, maybe then it goes to your guys' point. Maybe you look externally, maybe you do. But right now, it just seems like the easiest solution and the solution to at least start is you go to Riley Adams. And we know that, he was called up for a few days when the Jays were back in Oakland back in April. So he was here for a few days. He didn't get into a game, unfortunately, but give him a chance. Why not? And, we'll see what happens as the Jays are now set to begin probably one of the toughest weeks, at least based on their schedule. I guess when you start with Chicago, New York, Boston, they have a few tough series ahead of them.
And you know who is on the 40-man roster? Gabriel Moreno. So
see,
who knows?
That's impressive. Yeah. You never know, because he's also lighting it up in Double A, and you've seen him this year, Mark, in person. So yeah,
he's still hitting. I think it's like 367 that he's still hitting in AAA, and of course now we're like, for them, a month into the season because they started at the beginning of May. So who knows? Who knows what will happen? In other injury talk, we know that Cavan Biggio has started his rehab assignment in AAA. He's already hit a home run there, which is obviously a good sign. He is someone who does tend to have kind of sneaky power. In 2019, I think he hit 19 or 20 home runs, which is a lot more than any of us expected. Another guy who seems to be trending in the right direction is George Springer. We've seen him running the bases on back-to-back days, and he seems to be going at 100% of his ability. So that's a really good sign. Hopefully he's back within the next week or two. With these two guys coming back, this is a question that everyone has been talking about. I don't think we've talked about it yet. We've kind of been avoiding it until the point where he gets back to the majors and to a rehab assignment. But what do you do with the lineup when he's back? Because there's really no one you can move down at this point, right? Marcus Semien, you can't touch him. Bo Bichette, he's been doing well. Maybe he's the one guy who you can move, but Vladdy, untouchable. Teoscar Hernandez, untouchable. Randall Grichuk, we know he is asked specifically to hit in the fifth spot behind Teoscar Hernandez. So in my view, you can't move him. So to me, it's like George Springer hitting sixth. Like, that doesn't make sense, but that's the easiest solution right now. So how do you formulate the lineup? Who do you move down? How do you shake things out to make sure George Springer has room in this lineup at the top of the lineup and Cavan Biggio has room at the bottom of the lineup?
I think you can move Springer to the leadoff spot, but move Semien to number 2, or you can keep Semien in the leadoff spot and move Springer to second and then Bo to sixth, because Bo Bichette and then Vladdy and Teoscar and Randall Grichuk, like it normally is. But I don't think Bo Bichette's an ideal 2-hitter because he only has a 308 on base percentage, and he tends to swing a lot, and that's not what you want in the 2-hole. So I think you can put Semien in the 2-hole, or you can move Springer to the 2-hole and then just put one of them at the leadoff spot, because they're both high on base guys, and I think that would be a pretty good tandem at the top of the order, especially with Vladdy and then Teoscar. So that would be like probably one of the best 1 to 4 hitters in the MLB at that point. So I think you can do that. And then Bo in the fifth spot, I think that he would be better down there. Just to probably see more pitches, and just basically, that's how I would do it.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think, as much as Marcus Semien's been hot, we know the month he's had an OPS over 1,000, AL player of the month for May. I think you got. I don't see any other way. I think you have to bring back George Springer to the leadoff spot. I really do. And then going to your point, Dave, too, I can see where maybe you move down Bichette a few spots and then you keep Semien at 2. I do think you keep Semien at the top of the order, though. But we know, we've seen him at 6 this year as well, because we know how he had a slow start and the Jays moved him down. And of course, that's kind of where he found his game in the 6th spot. So I can see both scenarios, but I for sure see him moving down. And it's just a little bit of a risk because we know how hot he's been and you don't want to touch him. But it's hard to imagine, Mark, even when you introduce it, seeing George Springer hit 6th. So that's the other problem. It's a tough situation. But with Bo Bichette as well, maybe moving him down helps him a bit. Dave, you were mentioning that he's just swinging at pretty much everything this year, and I think you guys can agree. He's just, at times, he's been very streaky, and his strikeout rate, too, is at the highest it's ever been, going back to his rookie year in 2019. It's at 25.5% this year, and that's up almost 5% from last year. So he's swinging a lot more. He's not, he's been streaky, as I mentioned, but his average is obviously lower, and usually his average is pretty high. It's around 300. This year it's at 260, but his on base percentage isn't as high as well. I don't know, I know he's playing well. There's been times this year where I've been frustrated watching Bichette. I don't know what's going on. I'd like to see him be more of a contact singles hitter rather than trying to hit a home run every at bat. I just gets me a little annoyed sometimes, but either way, Vladimir Guerrero Jr. stays untouchable at the 3 spot. I agree with you guys on that. I think George Springer goes to the leadoff spot. And then I think with that, Semien moves down a few spots, and maybe that impacts Bichette. And maybe we will be seeing Springer soon, because I don't know if you guys saw, but back on June 5th, which was Saturday, there was a GIF of Springer in the dugout, and pretty much you can catch him mouthing off to somebody 5 more days. So 5 more days until he's back, 5 more days until he's on a rehab assignment. Either way, it seems like we're getting close. So hopefully next 2 weeks, by mid-June, we do see George Springer back for sure by the end of the month. It's good news. And we mentioned too, Cavan Biggio is on a rehab assignment too. He homered yesterday in his first at bat for Trenton/Buffalo. So it's getting optimistic for the injuries. Still aren't getting there, I guess, with the pitchers. We're still dealing with that. But either way, it's good to see that George Springer is eventually going to be coming back. And hopefully, either way, whatever you do with the lineup, hopefully he stays, because we know he wasn't ready. He rushed it a little bit. 4 games, he kind of rushed it, and he re-aggravated, and that's why he's obviously back in the IL now. So hopefully he's 100% this time. And for the lineup, I do see him going back to that leadoff spot, though, as much as you could have a different opinion, Mark. But either way, a lot of the guys are staying where they were, but Semien and Bichette, they might have to be, they're going to be the 2 people impacted if Springer is back.
I say put him 1 or 2, preferably 2. I think Marcus Semien, I just can't mess with him. I mean, like, how can you look at someone who just won AL Player of the Month, who is, I think he's like 3rd or 4th in all of baseball in WAR, of course, trailing Vladimir Guerrero Jr. at 1. But like, it's just, I don't know how you can look at this guy and say to his face, sorry, but we got to move you from your position, because even though you're doing phenomenally, we're paying this guy $150 million and he gets what he wants. I don't know how you can tell Marcus Semien that. And honestly, I think George Springer fits better in the number 2 spot. Like, as someone who has power, someone who hits for power, you want someone, at least one person ahead of him, so that he can drive him in when he does hit a double, when he does hit a home run. So I would prefer that to having, like we saw George Springer have a 2 home run game, but he's doing it in the leadoff spot, with the 7, 8, 9 hitters coming up before him, and there's no one on base. So I think having him in the number 2 spot, having him capitalize on that power, but also capitalizing on the fact that he is a high on base guy, getting on base, extending the innings for guys like Vladdy, Teoscar Hernandez. So the way I would write it up is Marcus Semien number 1, George Springer 2, and then of course Vladdy number 3, Teoscar Hernandez 4, Bo Bichette 5, Randall Grichuk 6, and then Gurriel 7, Biggio/Panic/Espinal 8, and Danny Jansen 9 / McGuire or Alejandro Kirk. So that's how I would shake it up. I think it's a good problem to have someone like Cavan Biggio hitting 8th, or someone like Lourdes Gurriel Jr. hitting 7th. Like, that's the best case scenario. And one thing that does concern me about that is the fact that you would have Randall Grichuk and Bo Bichette hitting back to back. And I think they're very similar hitters in the way that, they they don't always make contact, as you were saying, Bryson. They do swing and miss at a lot of pitches, and when they do make contact, good things happen. But, we've heard Kevin Barker on Baseball Central talk about it. Randall Grichuk is the same playing hitter. He doesn't adapt the pitch of his swing based on who he's facing or what pitches he sees. He just swings it, and if it makes contact, it's going to be loud. It's going to do things on the base pass, but if he doesn't make contact, you're going to see bad swings on off-speed pitches. So I'm a little concerned that you have two guys like that who potentially could be hitting back to back, but honestly, I don't think it's too big of a deal. I think to have someone like Bo Bichette or Randall Grichuk hitting sixth, like that's just crazy. It makes you really appreciate how great this lineup is.
And yeah, that was my question, was if you have Springer at 2, where does Bichette go? And that makes sense that you're going to drop him to the middle of the order, which I understand. And of course, there is the risk there. And that's the only part where I agree with you, is to leave Semien at 1. It's because you don't want to touch somebody or who's that hot. And that's the risk that you take. I mean, do the Jays still go ahead with it? Perhaps. I mean, none of us really know, but it's going to be a difficult decision for Charlie Montoyo, but it's a good situation to have, because based on what Marcus Semien did in April and what he did in May, I think we all know what you'd rather than having to move him down because he's cold. And then in this case, don't want to touch him because of how hot he is, but it's a tough decision, but it's a good one to have. And the top of the order so far, or at least right now, it's been good. But as you head into the lower part, the 6, 7, 8, 9, you can kind of understand or kind of see the impact that these injuries are having, because I mean, Joe Panic has been hitting at 6 a lot. I don't know how you guys feel about that. I wanted to ask you guys about that. I know he's been hot, but he just doesn't seem to be getting a lot of good feedback on social media about how he's hitting 6. So, what do you guys think of that? I just thought that was a little interesting. And over the weekend, based on, just because he's been playing good the past week.
Lourdes Gurriel Jr. should be hitting above Joe Panic, without a doubt in my mind. I don't care how hot he is. Gurriel should be above him, because Gurriel is also very hot right now.
I think the only reason Joe Panic's hitting 6 is to break up the righties from Grichuk to Gurriel. They also strike out a lot, and they don't put the ball in play a lot. Gurriel has the lowest walk percentage among qualified hitters in the MLB this year, so that's not that good. So I think I don't know. I personally just think it's just to break up the righties and have somebody. But although Joe Panic doesn't get on base that much either, but no, again, he's just a lefty, so I think that's why they do it.
And it is true that, like what I was saying, Grichuk and Bichette being similar hitters, Grichuk and Gurriel are similar hitters. I think even more so than Grichuk and Bichette, because Gurriel has a very long swing. He does strike out a lot. He does miss pitches a lot. So yeah, it's a good reason.
It is. And like I said, when Springer is back, that bottom of the order will get interesting to see how it's kind of restructured, because we know how it looks now. And, it's a good problem to have, but I'm very curious to see, especially probably a little bit more curious to see, if Bichette does move down, that's where I get very curious to see how it's all going to transpire from 6, 7, 8, 9. So either way, I do hope they keep Biggio at the bottom of the order too. Maybe Montoyo doesn't do that, and maybe he puts him at 6 for a little bit. I don't know. I mean, Charlie Montoyo has done that a few times this year with Biggio, but a lot of people also would see the difference of how comfortable or more comfortable he does look hitting at the bottom of the order. So that's the one thing I also hope, is that they keep Biggio at the bottom of the order and rather not try and put him at 6 or even 5 sometimes. I think he's been at the 5 spot a few times this year, but more likely he's also been at 6. But either way, hopefully at the bottom of the order, that's where Biggio is as well. So that's all I wanted to mention too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It'll definitely be interesting to see what happens. And just a final thing, when you guys think Springer's actually going to be back? Because I'm optimistic with what we've been seeing, but we know he's going to need a rehab assignment before that. If what he was saying, like 5 more days, rehab assignment begins, maybe Wednesday or Thursday of this week, I think it takes him maybe a week in rehab. So that would put it at next weekend. Is that kind of an accurate timeline, you guys think, for him coming back? Because I have no idea. I don't know how to read the tea leaves on this, because he's been out for so long. And we were talking about him. Oh, he'll be back up for opening weekend against the Yankees. Like, they'll just keep him on the roster and he'll get to, I thought he was going to play in the Sunday game of the opening weekend against the Yankees. And we saw how wrong I was. So I don't know what to say.
I'm gonna say Friday, June 18th against the Orioles. It's an away series. Not much thinking behind that. Just by the time he does a rehab assignment and the time he, gets ready and starts running at full capacity, I just think that seems like a logical timeline for him to come back.
Yeah, and I like I mentioned, is the gift? Is he talking about he's back in 5 days, or is he the rehab assignment start? And they also mentioned too that he's making the trip to Chicago. So you have to imagine that maybe next Friday, maybe he starts. I know the Jays are in Boston. Maybe he can start a rehab assignment there. And if all goes well, I'll say 3 days earlier than you, Dave. I'll go June 15th, their next homestand against the Yankees for 3. But either way, it'll be around that time frame, like you said. And we right now they need his bat. So based on what it looks like for the Jays, they're in a tough division. We know that they're 6 games back right now. They're dealing with the Yankees, obviously on their tail by half a game. They're dealing with Boston. They're dealing with Tampa, and we know the series that they had this past weekend against the Astros. We know the 13-1 game that happened on Friday, where Zach Greinke pretty much went a complete game. He went the distance against the offense. I
Greg
know,
Maddux below 100
yeah,
pitches.
he did. And then, of course, Vladimir Guerrero Jr. did homer in one of those games, so that's also good to see. They had a solid one on Saturday, and even Sunday yesterday, another day where they just looked lost at the plate. Luis Garcia pretty much torched them. I don't know what happened with just Luis Garcia pretty much trailed right through them. So that was also a frustrating performance offensively. So right now they do need him back. And right at the top of the episode, I mentioned they're in one of the toughest stretches of the schedule. You have Chicago, you have Boston for 3, you have the Yankees for 3. And then after that, it's going to get a little bit more easier. You have Baltimore twice, and then you also have Seattle at the end of the month. So it's going to start off hard. And then by the end of the month, hopefully it starts to lighten up for them. And maybe that's when they can continue to make their push.
Yeah, if the Blue Jays can get through the next 10, 15 days with a 500 record,
It's a win. Yeah.
it's going to be incredible because then they're just coasting until the All-Star break, and they could theoretically, if they have a good next 2 weeks, they could get to the All-Star break like 10 or 12 games above 500. It's possible just because of the nature of their schedule. So let's hope it happens. And thank goodness for the Yankees right now. They are not
Great to
doing
see
well
them.
at all. They just got swept by the Red Sox last night in a brutal loss in extra innings, although part of that is to blame by the umpiring in that game. But I mean, thank goodness for the Yankees, making every Blue Jay fan feel better right now. But okay, I think we'll end our podcast there. Thank you to everyone who listened to this episode of Section 138. Hopefully next time we'll have all 3 of us back together, but we definitely appreciate Dave coming on and having a new voice and some new thoughts on here. You can follow us on social media at Section 138 Pod. You can support our podcast on Patreon at patreon.com/Section 138 Pod. You can get exclusive benefits like joining our Discord, getting access to bloopers, getting to choose the intro and outro music to the podcast. So some exciting things there. And then lastly, you can just rate and review our podcast on Apple Podcasts, which just helps spread the word about what we're doing. All right. Hopefully this next series goes a little bit better, and we'll catch you next time.